Okay, after that, I guess this next movie that I'm going to talk about, which I am also fairly critical of and have already had many publicized thoughts about, this movie is actually going to just feel and be a lot better than whatever the hell I just talked about with White Men Can't Jump. I am talking, of course, about the notorious movie, The Little Mermaid, another Disney live-action remake. Like White Men Can't Jump, did we really need a retelling of The Little Mermaid? This film is directed by Rob Marshall, who has previously directed other Disney films such as Mary Poppins Returns and Into the Woods. This film stars Halle Berry, Jonah Haver-King, Daveed Diggs, Awkwafina, Jacob Tremblay, Javier Bardem, and Melissa McCarthy as Ursula. For those who do not know the plot of The Little Mermaid, I'll just explain it real quick, even though I know everyone who's watching this knows the plot of The Little Mermaid. But regardless, Ariel, a mermaid/princess of the sea, longs to see the surface world, but her father, King Triton, refuses. When Ariel makes a deal with Ursula, a sea witch, she gets her wish to be human. But if she does not experience love's first kiss, she will be enslaved forever by Ursula. And I've had a lot of really public thoughts about my disliking of these Disney live action films. So going into this movie, I was a little just, I wouldn't even say scared, but hesitant to go into this movie. I didn't really want to see this movie. But I decided I'm going to go. Let's go see it. I review everything. I had heard enough positive about this movie that I thought maybe this one will be different. And walking out of this movie, I'm like, no, it's not really different, but at least I enjoyed good chunks of this movie. Let me say what works about this movie, and that's Halle Bailey. She is electric in this movie, legitimately. She is an excellent singer. Her numbers are really good. Now, do I like how her numbers, like Part of Your World, are directed? Not really, but her voice is kind of undeniable. And she has this really magnetic chemistry with Jonah Haver-King, who plays Prince Eric. They really work together. And for a large part of this film, if you know the Little Mermaid story, you know that Ariel doesn't have her voice. And thus, Bailey has to be a lot more communicative through her. I know I messed up that word twice. Ignore me. Bailey has to be a lot more just expressive in her face, is what I'm trying to say. And she is pretty wonderful in this scene, especially when she loses her voice. You really just feel the chemistry with no words. And it's a really powerful thing to translate from the screen to the audience, that you actually believe this chemistry and this romance and these two characters fall in love. And when this movie is largely a love story, that does give the film a lot of credibility to work. Also in this film, I found Melissa McCarthy to actually be quite a strong Ursula. I think she is the best adaptation of animated to live action that they bring in this movie, where I liked the look, I liked her musical number, I liked her lair. All of that Ursula stuff in this movie really worked, and I found Melissa McCarthy's performance to actually uplift this movie as well. So I like the villain and I like the heroes. That's a good start for this film. I also thought the CGI was so widely criticized before the movie. This film looks bright and colorful. At least this film has color to it. It's one of the more colorful looking live action retellings that we've had, where this one doesn't just look grayed out and boring and dusty. This one actually has like blues and greens and pinks. Like you're like, oh, okay. There is actually color on the screen that makes it more enjoyable to watch. With me saying that, that's still not necessarily a fair thing, because now I'm about to compare it to the animated film, which I don't necessarily want to do, but this film literally requires you to do it because these films exist together, because that's how Disney has decided to do it. And the issue is, while I did talk about how there is some color to this film, it's still nowhere near as lively when compared to the cartoon. The literal live action transformation of characters like Sebastian the Crab or Flounder the Fish, it's so uninteresting. They look like real fish and real crabs, and they just don't look particularly fun. Same with the sea. For a lot of sections of the sea, it's really too dark to see what's going on. I mean, underwater, they try to capture this effect of like, oh, this is what it would look like. And it's like, yeah, it looks really dark and it's really hard to see anything. And that's not really cinematic when you can't see your characters underwater, or you can't see the fish swimming around or the turtles. There is just this feature of this movie where it's a little just toned down for my personal liking. Daveed Diggs, Awkwafina, and Javier Bardem are also just checked out making this movie. I thought them as performers were just kind of lazy. I liked Daveed Diggs specifically a lot. And I just found his musical numbers really boring. They weren't bad. He's a talented enough singer, but I didn't feel any passion. I didn't feel any fun with it. It really did feel like they were asking Daveed Diggs to do karaoke. And it didn't make for a particularly fun way to watch this movie. And you mix that with the realistic special effects created something so unengaging, I should say, because you had Daveed Diggs kind of feeling like he's doing karaoke partnered with this crab that looks like an actual crab. And it just looks boring and it sounds boring. And it's almost as if this film is afraid to have something of a personality. And I think this is largely due to the failure of this film as directed by Rob Marshall, who's the biggest criticism I have of this film, where Rob Marshall struggles to make this film look cinematic. The shot composures are flat in this movie. The musical numbers are low energy. He struggles to incorporate the special effects with real life effects or the individuals, and it makes this film feel like it was filmed on a soundstage. You really do feel like this film is not natural. And it's a really hard thing to do in this movie, is to make this film feel natural in the style that Disney is asking Rob Marshall to direct this, because we know this is how Disney has been making these live action movies. They make the animals look real. They want to have a realistic look to this movie, and that's how they're going to explain themselves differently than the cartoons, because if this film looks more like a cartoon, then why aren't you just watching the cartoon? You have to make it look like a live action. But the problem with making it look like a live action is animals aren't expressive, and thus this film is nowhere near as expressive and artful as the cartoon version, which is just a lot more fun to watch. And it's the biggest fault of this movie, besides Rob Marshall, is the Little Mermaid's mere existence shouldn't be. The Little Mermaid as a live action film shouldn't be, because everything that this movie does well, as much as I just complimented Halle Bailey, the actor who played Prince Eric, Melissa McCarthy, while they're well done and they have some really good chemistry and there's some really wonderful stuff that they do in this movie, it was all done better in the animated film. It was all done better in the cartoon. And everything that is added to this film feels insignificant because we know where the story is going. We know the beats that the story will have to hit. And we know what a well-paced, well-written movie like this would look like, because we have the original cartoon version, which comes in at like 90 minutes compared to this movie, which is 2 hours and 20 minutes. So thus, you know what a sand-down version of this movie would look like, and it's a better movie. Now, with that all said, I went really hard on this movie, and I don't want to go that hard because this movie is actually not as offensive as other Disney movies have been. Other of these Disney live-action movies are. I didn't find this film particularly offensive in any way. I actually enjoyed watching this film to some degree. They're certainly fun to be had. There is a few good action sequences. There is specifically scenes with ships involving Prince Eric. The Prince Eric character feels a little bit more fleshed out. The actors, specifically Bailey and King, do enough to keep you engaged in it. The new additions, while they add nothing, also don't do anything to derail the movie, as other live-action Disney films have done. And it's also just the case of, and maybe I'm giving this too much credit, but I just haven't seen the original cartoon in maybe since I was a kid, maybe since I was like 8. Thus, while I know the story of The Little Mermaid, I can't say that I know the film's inside and out. It's not like I have every plot beat memorized. And thus, when watching the film, I haven't watched it to death. I know some of the songs, but I don't remember a lot of the story beats. Thus, I'm actually kind of engaged with it because I'm like, okay, I don't actually fully remember what happens here. Or I don't know this scene, or what is this? Like, there's just enough of the story. Like, for instance, the end scene, the famous one, where Ursula turns big and she's fighting Prince Eric and Ariel. I didn't remember that. And that was kind of fun to experience. So it is just maybe also the case where some of the ones that I found more offensive, like The Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, Peter Pan, those are stories that I know so well. This is not a story that I know So at the end of the day, I had fun watching this movie, and I found aspects of this film to be very charming. And it is a needless remake, but I had fun watching this needless remake. And that's almost enough to just give this film a pass. And I will say, the kids in my theater loved this movie. They were going wild for this movie. They loved everything about it. I was kind of shocked at 2 hours and 20 minutes that they were able to sit through it and enjoy it. And yes, this film does go on too long, and it does go on too long for kids even, where you really did start feeling some of that energy in the last 40 minutes, where you just start hearing some of the kids crying out or just getting a little bored or yawning or like falling asleep. Like, you did hear that, but for the most part, when the film ends, they're all like cheering, screaming, they're all singing along with the movie. This film is a huge success because it does know its target demographic, which is children and the parents of those children who also grew up with The Little Mermaid. I can't say I necessarily had the greatest time watching this movie, but for a date night that I went with my girlfriend, she really enjoyed it. I had fun watching this movie with her, and it was certainly in no terms anywhere near as bad as a Peter Pan and Wendy. There is a lot to like about this movie. It's just the needless remake of this movie and the cynicism that I have towards those Disney live action movies didn't work for me. But overall, can recommend this film, even if it's a soft recommend. I'm giving it 2.5 out of 5 stars, leaning positive, but not highly positive.